So it'll be recorded, so it'll end up on our YouTube page, and also in case you have to leave or whatever, it will stay on Facebook as well, so you can come back and see the conversation too. So personally, I'm super excited to have both of you here. Caroline, I love all of the books that you edit. And I was telling Anne in the green room early, Caroline, that I had an early copy of Meet Me in the Museum and just fell in love. So so happy to have both of you here. But for those of you that might want a little background, Anne Youngson is retired and lives in Oxfordshire. She has 2 children and 3 grandchildren to date. Her debut novel, Meet Me at the Museum, was shortlisted for the Cost of First Novel Award. She's here today to talk to us about her latest book, Narrowboat Summer. Joining Anne today is Caroline Bleeke. She is the senior editor editing upmarket fiction and nonfiction at Flatiron Books, with an emphasis on underrepresented voices, innovative structure and style, writing with a strong sense of place and heart. Boy, all of your books are that, and then some. Her lists include Angie Cruz's Dominicana, tell me how do you say Annick's last name?
Arud Pragasam.
Arud Pragasam. The Story of a Brief Marriage. Neil Patel's If You See Me, Don't Say Hi. I love that title. Bronx Book Festival founder Sarisha J. Fennell's Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, and Yangtze Choo's The Night Tiger. We hosted Yangtze, well, I want to say last year, but it was now 2019 that we hosted her, and she's fantastic, and Night Tiger is amazing. So hopefully, Anne, you'll get out here one day and we'll host a live event with you. And 2 of my personal favorites that you've done, Caroline, Mr. Dickinson is Carol and Miss Austen. Those are another 2 I had to throw in there. Caroline has a master's degree in 18th century and romantic literature. And with that, I'm going to send the conversation to you 2, and I'll see you in about 30 minutes.
Thank you so much, Julie. We're so excited to be here. We love Warwick's and all of the support that you've given to Anne on her first book, Meet Me at the Museum, and now this wonderful new novel, The Narrowboat Summer. And Anne is going to read a little bit from the novel for anybody that hasn't read. I think that'll give you a good taste of the novel and what's to come. So over to you, Anne.
Okay. I thought I'd just read the introductory section, which sets up the story that then unfolds. So this is how it starts. On the towpath of a canal in a town not far from London, not far from the coast, is moored a narrowboat painted dark blue with the name Number 1 picked out in red lettering on the prow. It is tethered tightly to the bank with ropes made wet by the rain and slimy with age, wrapped around pegs bent out of shape by the misaimed blows of a lump hammer. It is still in the water. At either end the doors are fast shut, and the windows along the side are latched. On the roof is a skylight, cantilevered up to let the fresh air into the cabin below. Puddles of water on the deck and roof show that it has been raining, but at this moment it is not. There are 2 people on the towpath walking towards each other. One is a tall, relatively plump woman, that is to say, around half the number of women in her age group, she has gone some distance past 50, would be slimmer and shorter than she is. But she is not so tall or so plump as to be remarkable. In one hand, she has an orange carrier bag, and on her feet, a pair of bright silver trainers. These might not be out of place on a towpath, but are out of place with her black wool skirt and tailored blouse. Her hair is wrapped up in a largely colourless scarf, apparently once purple. The woman approaching her is shorter and more slender. She is carrying an umbrella in a colour often called fuchsia, though fuchsias come in a range of colours. She is holding it at her side, not needing its protection at the moment, but open, as if anxious about the time it would take to bring it into use, if she should suddenly need it. Her hair is carefully styled, and her clothes might have been carefully chosen to be unremarkable. If so, the choice was successful. As they approach the moored boat, the sun inserts a finger of light between the clouds, and it is all at once a lovely day, at that moment, on that towpath. At almost the same instant, when the two women are close enough to each other for a nod and a smile of greeting, if either or both of them thought that was appropriate. They are complete strangers, so it seems unlikely. At that precise moment, the narrowboat begins to howl. It howls as if it were a mezzo-soprano in mid-aria, spotting her husband committing adultery in the stalls, whilst being impaled from behind by a careless spear carrier. Both women stop walking.
I love that opening. And we have now met three very important characters in this story. Eve and Sally, who are two of the heroines of it, and Noah, the boat's dog, who I think is also a very important character in the novel. But for those who haven't read the novel, just to give people kind of a very brief introduction, this is a story about two women named Eve and Sally, who, as you put it, are both, you know, some years past 50. And they meet on a towpath in a canal in England, completely by chance, and are brought, you know, together by this howling dog. And it transpires that the narrowboat that the dog is in is owned by a woman named Anastasia, who has kind of spent her life on the canals, living this really wonderful kind of itinerant life. But she is now landbound, and she needs someone to take the boat up the canals for the summer. And so Eve and Sally, two strangers, decide that they're going to sort of put their lives on hold and take this challenge and spend the summer in this narrowboat together. So it's just a kind of wonderful story about second chances and the possibility of changing your life at any stage, really. And both of the women at the end have to decide if they want to return to the lives that they had, or, you know, forge a new path as they've begun to do. And I think these are ideas that we also saw in your debut novel, Meet Me at the Museum. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about this idea of second chances and you know, changing your life, even if it seems as though your path should be set. If you could just sort of speak to that in relation to the main characters in the book.
Yes, it's something that it's a topic that appeals to me and interests me, is how people make decisions to change their lives. And I think often it's something quite small. Sometimes it's something quite major, but quite often it's something small which just nudges you out of a rut that you're in. Which is the case with the character of Sally, who has decided that her marriage is no longer fulfilling, not for any enormous traumatic reasons, but simply because she's sunk into a place where she never really intended to be, and she hopes that there is more out there that she can she can take advantage of. Now that her children have grown up, and in Eve's case, she has a very high-powered job, which she actually loses. She's made redundant by her company, so you could say that change is forced upon her. And I just love to explore how people come to terms with changes in their lives and how they think through what happens next. And I particularly like the idea of thinking something through in partnership with somebody else, through friendship, effectively. And in Meet Me at the Museum, that conversation was actually in letters. It wasn't a real conversation. It was a conversation at a distance. But nevertheless, it was the same idea that by talking to each other, two characters could begin to see what was wrong with their life, what was right about their lives, but also what was wrong about their lives, and what there was that they might never have thought that they would miss because they didn't know about it. And in this novel, this is definitely a novel of friendship. It's about these two strangers who are very different women with very different lives, and how by beginning to live together and journey together, because it's the story of a journey, and talk to each other, they begin to look at the future differently and at themselves differently.
Yes, absolutely. And as you say, like the conversation in Meet Me at the Museum is epistolary. The characters, you know, are on different, very different parts of the world. Whereas here, the two women are as close as can be. They're sharing a tiny boat, which I kind of love. And so much of the story is the story of the canal system that they're moving through, the countryside that they're seeing, this very particular lifestyle. And I think it's one that British readers might be more familiar with than American readers. So could you just talk to us a little bit about what a narrowboat is, what the canal system is, the community that, you know, that has chosen this life, and how you, you know, decided to write about it, and the kind of research that you did to flesh it out.
Yes, I mean, it was one of the pleasures of writing the novel was doing the research and learning more and more about the canals, which I've always loved, and I've been on canal holidays ever since I was a child. And in fact, my sister lived on a canal boat for a number of years, so I'm pretty familiar with them. But yes, the canal system was developed. It began to be developed in the 18th century. To try and link the coal fields to the ports, because obviously carrying coal by road, this was before the railways turned up, carrying coal by road was very, was very slow and time consuming and costly. And so they came up with this idea of creating networks of canals, which would have barges drawn by horses. And these barges could carry enormous weights of coal. And although they did it fairly slowly, they did it consistently. You know, they weren't held up by bad weather or bad roads or anything else. And there was quite a competition for canals. Canals were built all over the place. And by the time the last canals were built, the railways arrived. So actually they were built for a purpose, which admittedly it was perhaps 100 years later, but even so, sort of not that long after the first canals were dug, their original purpose was they were no longer supreme in fulfilling their original purpose. And ever since then, I mean, they carried on. There were working boats on the canals right up to the 1950s, but gradually they started, a lot of them fell into disrepair because nobody could see a point to them. And then they've been taken over as places of leisure and places to live, alternative lifestyles, places for holidays. They've just got this magic feel to them because they were built for boats towed by horses. The banks won't withstand high speeds. So even in these days of diesel engine boats, you still have to travel really slowly. And it just has, and of course they go through the countryside, they go through the most marvelous countryside. And even when they go through a town, you see a different aspect of the town. I mean, there's canals all over Birmingham, which is a pretty is an industrial city, Victorian city. But the canals are just magic places, even in the midst of a city. So yes, they are absolutely wonderful, and I love them. And one of the, you're right that in England they're obviously pretty well understood. And one of the nice things about the novel was published in November in the UK, and I've been absolutely delighted that an awful lot of people who live or enjoy the canals have told me how much they enjoy it. So I've obviously hit it right for them.
Well, I think you'll have a lot of Americans, you know, very eager to try out the canals and the narrowboats for themselves after reading this book. But I've been thinking a lot. So you wrote this novel well before COVID-19 and quarantine. I first read it long before that happened. But, you know, readers now are reading it in a very different context where so many of us have been at once. You know, Sally and Eve are confined to this small space in the same way that many of us are, but at the same time, they're moving through a countryside, they're traveling. But I think the novel has a lot to say about these sort of simple daily routines and rituals and how kind of comforting they can be. And there's a quote from the book about Eve, and you write, as long as she needed to think ahead only as far as the next tap, the next locks, the next mooring, Eve had no room to worry about the next month, the next year. And I think there's something very comforting about that right now, this idea that, you know, you can kind of only look ahead to the next stop of the canal boat, the next lock that you have to get through. So I was just curious if you had kind of thought differently about the story or the characters, having been through the year that we've all been through together, if you think there's kind of special, I hesitate to say lessons to be drawn, but you know, like things that you sort of hope readers will find comfort in right now because of the situation that we're all in.
Yes, I suppose it is, as that quote says, it's just focusing on the tasks ahead, which when you're on a narrowboat is quite easy to do, because there always will be another task that you have to complete, and you keep you keep traveling. And actually, because the canals were obviously they were dug by you know, by hand, and so they went round obstacles. So there are always bends. There's bends on the canals, and so you can almost say, I mean, the cover that you've designed for the book in the US, which I absolutely love. It is it's a really good representation of a canal boat, but also you can see that there's a bend, and so there's always a bend ahead, and you just have to look forward to the bend ahead, and just worry about the things that, or not worry about, but just think through the things that you have to do. And I think that's, I feel as if that's not necessarily where I started with this pandemic. You know, I actually felt at the beginning that there was quite an urgency to make use of this time when nothing else was happening, you know, to do something really useful. And you felt as if you needed to really worry about making the best of this time. But now I have got to the stage of just looking always at the bend ahead and not expecting that when you round that bend, there won't be yet another bend, because that's just exactly what our life has been like. So just sort of relaxing and taking the things that you can control, just worrying about the things you can control and not worrying about the things you can't. So I do feel, and so many people have said to me, including my own husband, actually, you know, in the middle of all of this, have said, oh, you know, I do long to go on another canal holiday. It does make you feel that that's where you want to be, because it does have the advantage of the fact that you're traveling all the time. So the scenery is changing. So, you know, and I think we're all a bit short of traveling at the moment, aren't we? The view outside the window doesn't change, but apart from that, I do think it's a sort of a mindset that works for me.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. And then this sort of goes back to our original conversation about this idea of second chances and sort of changing your life. And I think you raise this really interesting question in the novel of, you know, the possibility of people changing. And you sort of think like there are certain parts of your personality that are set maybe from, you know, an extremely young age. Can people really change? I think that's something that we've all been thinking about a lot this year as well. Can an event like this really alter people at their core? And you have this great quote in the novel. After Eve and Sally have been on this journey together for several weeks, they've gotten to know each other, and Eve says to Sally, "You've turned into someone else entirely," and Sally strongly disagrees with her. And so Eve revises that statement to, "You are the person you've always been, but that person is just rising to the surface." And I think that's such an interesting distinction, or maybe it isn't a distinction at all. Like, if when we say that somebody's changed, is it that the person that they really are has just kind of come to the fore, or they feel like they can finally be themselves? And I just wondered what you thought of that distinction, how you think it resonates with these different characters.
Yes, I don't actually believe that people change fundamentally. They don't go from you know, having one set of attitudes and aspirations. I mean, it's at the basic level, isn't it? Whether you're risk averse or you look for risk, whether you you know, like to argue things out, or you prefer consensus. I mean, all of those sorts of things. But I do think that we all modify our behavior according to the people that we're with. And by modifying our behavior with a lot of people for, over a long time, we possibly suppress some aspects of our personality. And actually, funnily enough, I mean, this isn't this is not a positive experience, but I have a recently lost a relative who had Alzheimer's, and she was a lovely person. In fact, in some ways, she was somebody a little bit like Anastasia. When I, after I'd written the book, I didn't think it at the time, but when I read it back, I could feel how I'd sort of, you know, built this wonderful character who was a relative of mine, how I'd built, you know, how she was beginning to surface in Anastasia. And when she had Alzheimer's, she was recognizably the same person, but what actually altered was her the way that the things that came to the surface. So all of the sort of, you know, the social niceties were stripped away, and she was so she said things. She was more contentious, you know, and she said things she wouldn't otherwise have said. I mean, obviously, eventually, it is a horrible, horrible disease, and you know, and it was all it was not positive at all. But initially, I thought how interesting it was, how immensely lovable she was, even when she was coping with what to somebody outside might look like a personality change, but absolutely was not a personality change. It was almost a behavioral change. It was how she was reacting to a different society, you know, different different way of being. And so I feel that particularly about Sally in the book, that she is sort of shedding layers of repression which have made her appear to be the person that Eve thinks she is when she first meets her, and enables her to come out and be the person that is more interesting, more fulfilling, more has more opportunities.
And bringing up the character of Anastasia, so she's the woman who owns the narrowboat, and she kind of talks Sally and Eve into taking this on, and she is a really wonderful character. You know, you've already kind of alluded to her personality. You might initially call her prickly. She has those social niceties stripped away, but she's wonderful, and I loved getting to know her over the course of the book. And then in addition to those three, there's another woman who kind of rises to the fore as the novel progresses and becomes a central figure as well. She's a young woman named Trumpet, and she has spent a couple of years, I think at least, on the canals. She's in her early 20s. So she's at a very different life stage, but she is also at one of these kind of crossroads moments. So I think one beautiful part of the book is that you capture these women all at different stages of their lives, who are all confronting the possibility that they're going to change their lives in this major way. So at the risk of asking you to name your favorite child, I was wondering if there was a character of those four who you particularly enjoyed writing, or maybe who was difficult to write in an interesting way, or just kind of tell us about how these women came to you, and
Yes, Sally was difficult to write at the beginning. Eve was easy to write throughout, actually, because my own background is in manufacturing engineering industry, which is with the background I've given her, and so I had been in that environment, and I had actually I knew how I had behaved in order to hold my own in a very masculine working environment, and so Eve was quite easy to write, and I found her quite amusing. But Sally, initially, I had you know, I thought, who is this woman? And then the more I wrote, the clearer she became to me, and the more I loved her. Actually, in the end, you know, it was a treat when because they more or less alternate between them. Each scene is seen from, you know, one of them you'll be seeing one scene from the point of view of one, and then the next scene from the point of view of the other. And it was quite a treat when it was the turn to write Sally's point of view. But, yes, Trompette, I feel, is a sort of a work in progress. You know, it will be interesting, you know, to you know, in a couple of years' time, it would be really interesting to know where Trompette had got to. But,
I would love to know where the Canals are going to take her in particular.
Yeah.
So I don't want to talk the whole time, and I want to give audience time to discuss it. Just one last question before I turn it back over to Julie. So this is now your second launch. It's your second novel. I would love to have you talk to us just a little bit about how the experience compares, you know, your debut versus your sophomore. And of course, the circumstances this time around are very different. We're all homebound, and, you know, with Meet Me at the Museum, you were able to come over to the US and meet all of us and visit the office and visit with booksellers. But I wonder if there are, you know, new and wonderful things that came this time around, or if you could just sort of speak to the experience.
Yes, I mean, it's been such a major disappointment to me not being able to go out and meet the readers and the bookshops, not to visit all the bookshops and the libraries. I mean, it was just one of the absolute joys of having a novel published, you know, which I hadn't previously appreciated, that you got to meet all of these people and talk about books, and they would feel, you know, the whole experience of you know, having written the novel was enriched for me by the things that people came back and asked me and told me about what it had meant to them, and it was brilliant. And of course I've done very little of that this time round, which is a shame. But the positive thing, I think, is that I'm sure every author will say this, you know, that you think, you know, that before you have something published, you think, I'm probably writing rubbish. And then you have something published and you think, well, the next one is bound to be rubbish. You know, this was a flash in the pan. And so you get this sort of, you know, the difficult second novel. And a lot of the readers' comments that I've seen on all of the review, you know, on the blogs and the review sites, have specifically said that you know, it met their expectations of what somebody who'd written Meet Me at the Museum would write, which has been an absolute, it really is an absolute thrill. You know, yeah, it really has been. And I just hope that one day soon I'll be able to go out and meet some more people to talk about it.
Maybe the paperback.
Yeah.
That's it. Come on, bring on the paperback.
We'll do the paperback tour.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Because Caroline, I'm so glad you asked that question, and I think that that's for some of our viewers that may be watching now or watching the recorded version. The fact that you were a manufacturing engineer for most of your career, and I think that your characters, you know, that you write about too, and I think women and there's so many things that I was thinking about as you two were talking about how, you know, your trajectory of your life goes one way, and then it just like can take these turns that are unexpected, and to become such a novelist of, you know, acclaim and that we all just adore you, you can't even probably imagine that would have happened when you were writing that book.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, was it something that was writing a hobby that you had while you were an engineer, or was it just, did you have that career and then it was like, okay, now I'm done with that career and I'm just gonna like do this now?
No, I was writing, but it was a hobby, and I think and when I took early retirement and just did consultancy work and so on, I thought, well, now I have some more time. You know, I love writing, and anything that you love doing, you want to get better at doing. So I went on a variety of courses, and you know, as I went on courses, I met writers, I met other writers like me who were you know, just trying to write better. And you need those people around you. And then I met professional writers and got feedback on what I was doing. And the amount that, so the enjoyment that I had out of writing increased exponentially over time, until eventually somebody said, look, I think you ought to try and get this one published.
Wow. And that's the thing too, that I think that there's a little bit of a confidence with age too, that comes with, knowing yourself a little bit more. Because I think when we're young women, we question ourselves so much. Not that we don't question ourselves all the way through, but then you get to a certain age where you just go, no, this is what I'm going to do.
Exactly. That's a conversation I was having with somebody the other day, actually exploring this idea that as you grow older, you actually grow more confident, and therefore you have the you have the confidence to go out and do something different. And then of course I realized that the person I was talking to, who was quite young, maybe his mother had sort of retreated into the kitchen and never came out, because of course it's not true of everybody. Some people, as they age, they actually become very anxious, and I think that is such a shame, because we should feel, well, look, hey, it doesn't matter what anybody says about me, or what I do. It doesn't matter to me what people think.
Right.
So I'm just going to go for it.
All those years of experience and all that, it's just like, it's got to be worth something.
Yeah, exactly.
All those gray hairs that we.
Oh yeah.
And not to, we don't need to get specific on age, but what decade were you in when your first book was purchased and published?
I was 70 when it was published.
Isn't that fantastic? I love that. That is like absolutely the story of publishing, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's I think it's a credit to the publishing industry, actually, that they don't think, oh well, I think she's a bit old, I'll go for the younger model. They just think it's it's a book I think people are going to want to buy, so I'll publish it. And
I think it's speaking for Caroline. I mean, I can't speak for you, but it's like, when you have a good book, right? I mean, when you read those first few pages, doesn't matter age, sex, none of it really matters if it's a good book, right?
Exactly. And it doesn't matter, what age you are as a reader. I mean, when I bought Meet Me at the Museum to publish, I was in my 20s still. So, it still spoke to me in that profound way that you're looking for. And so I think that is truly the testament of a great novel, that, it just has this sort of ageless wisdom to it.
Right. It transcends so many different, demographics of people, that it's, that's what's so wonderful about it. And so the names of your characters, I can't help but laugh that Trumpet is one of your character names, which I just think is, where did you come up with that name?
I have no idea. I just had this, there are so many really strange people on the canal. There's quite a lot of old people. There's also young people, and there's rich people. There are people whose sort of hobby is spending money on these really expensive boats, and then there's some people who are really having an alternative lifestyle. And I had this image as they were going down the canal. I had this image of this girl standing on the side, and the name Trumpet just came into my mind. So I have no idea where it came from. Maybe one day it'll be revealed to me. But
I love that though.
Exact same question, Julie, in my copy, or my editorial notes to Anne initially. I was like, I want to know the story behind this name, but maybe that'll be for the sequel that's coming.
Exactly. No, honestly, because it is just one of those names that it can take on so many meanings.
Yeah.
It absolutely can. Well, to Caroline, to both of you though, so this is kind of an industry sort of question. So, and I know that a lot of our viewers like to get a little behind the scenes stuff. So now, did you work with two different editors in the UK and the US, and are the books the same? Are they different? Caroline, can you speak to that a little bit, maybe?
Yeah. So with Meet Me at the Museum, Anne had already worked pretty closely with her UK editor, who had bought it initially. And that often happens when the author is based in the UK. It'll sell there first and then go, come over here to find a publisher. So they had kind of done the real heavy lift of an edit. But then after I signed on, we did do a nice couple of rounds of sort of smaller line edits and just a couple more questions that I had. So that's always nice too. Maybe it's a little bit onerous for the author, but it's always fun as the editor to get to kind of, you know, bring your own editorial insights to it. And so the additions were basically the same. I think we did a little bit of Americanization of, you know, punctuation and spelling, just to kind of make it a little easier for US readers. But but the content of the book was essentially the same. And with the new book, you know, I was the same editor on both books, and UK editor was the same on both books. Interestingly, the UK edition has a different title, which also
I was going to talk about that. I was going to ask about that. Yeah, the titles are always interesting to me on how we come up with titles.
But that's always sort of fun. That we'll often have different covers, sometimes different titles, but you know, the essence of the book inside is the same.
So Narrowboat Summer. So what's the UK title?
It's 3 Women and a Boat.
Okay. One of my favorite. What was a 3 Men and a Boat? What is that?
3 Men and a Boat. And I think that was they were obsessed with this title from the beginning. Actually, you know, they because I wasn't entirely sure, but you know, they were not going to be diverted from it, and we had long conversations with Caroline about the title in the US when she said that wouldn't, she didn't feel that was a good title. And my agent and I both tried to come up with really, really clever titles and completely failed. And in the end, Caroline came back and said, we're going to call it the Narrowboat Summer. And I thought, well, that's just perfect.
Yeah, it is a
Why
great
had nobody thought of that before? That's, you know, it's especially now, you know, when we're in the middle of winter and it's gloomy, you know, that's just what you need.
Well, and it speaks just so perfectly to the book. I mean, it does. I mean, so does 3 Women in a Boat. I mean, that does too, but it's, you know, it really does evoke a great thing. Okay, so let me see here. I've got a question coming in. Amanda says she loved Meet Me at the Museum so much. If you don't mind answering a question about it, I don't have she doesn't have the new book yet. Her apologies. Did you always know that Meet Me in the Museum would be an epistolary? Thank you, Amanda, for making me say that word.
Such a great question.
No, the inspiration for it was a letter of dedication in the front of an archaeology book to some East Anglian schoolgirls, and so and I was just exploring really the idea of those. I thought, well, those East Anglian schoolgirls would now be at a certain age, and I was just exploring how they might react to the fact that you know, when they were children they had this connection with the Tolland man, and it seemed obvious that the way that this particular character that was forming in my mind, the way she would react would be to write a letter back. And so it started with a letter, and I don't recall ever having made a deliberate decision to carry on with letters. You know, I think I thought at some point I might abandon the letters and start to tell the story in a conventional way. So it almost wasn't a conscious decision. But it just worked so well. I mean, it worked so well for me, never mind. I wasn't thinking about readers then, really. I was just thinking about how much I was enjoying writing it. And I really loved writing it in letters because it was so gentle. And you know, the difficult, you know, you finish a chapter and then you start a new one and you have to think, oh, okay, so I have to work out, you know, what's going on in this new chapter. And of course, I didn't have to do that. I just had to look at the last letter and think, well, what would he say in response to that letter? What would she say in response to his letter? So, you know, I felt that the characters were revealing themselves in a way that it would have been hard for me to achieve any other way, actually. And, you know, if I sort of backed off and began to write it as a, you know, in a third person narrative, it would sort of put a distance between the reader and the characters, which wasn't there because you're just looking over their shoulder as they write. So
right, you were in their brain. You absolutely
exactly.
were. Their brain was just coming out in those letters for sure.
Exactly. I just love doing it, and it you know, having since then, of course, everybody has told me all of the novels in letters that they've ever read, and you know, I've searched out any number of them, and a lot of them are really brilliant, and I'm surprised that it's not more it's not a technique that's used more often.
Well, it has to be well done, and you did it well. And I think that that's the thing, that because I think that, you know, it isn't as easy as you made it seem.
Right.
So it was very well done. And so, you know, writing this novel in a more traditional, so like, was dialogue harder for you to do in this one versus, was it hard to come up with the dialogue?
Not really, no, because no.
Yeah.
Because
You just heard them talking.
yeah, I heard them talking, exactly. They started to chat away in my head. Yes.
I always love that. I always say that, you know, and I've had others say this before. It's like, people probably think we're crazy because we have these like characters talking to each other in our heads. Well, we are just about out of time here. Again, I can't tell you both how wonderful it is to be able to host both of you. And do you have a website or anything that people can go to find out what's going on with you?
I don't. I am on Instagram, but I don't post on it. I'm afraid that, you know, this is one of the drawbacks of being older, is that I've never sort of engaged with social media in a way that makes me feel comfortable with doing it. So
that's okay, because you
write
great.
On her behalf on the Flatiron social media, so people can find some info there.
Yeah.
Perfect, because that's the thing too, that is like, as long as you're writing wonderful books, that's what matters. Caroline and I, as the bookseller and the publisher, will do all that other stuff, right? Spreading the word. And Caroline, thank you so much. And you're on social. Are you on some social media that people could follow you on? That's public.
I am, yeah. So just CA and then BLEEKE on Twitter and Instagram.
Perfect. Okay, ladies. Well, thank you so much. Again, for everybody that's happening to tune in right now, this will stay on Facebook, so you can go back and see the beginning. It's also being recorded. It'll be on our Facebook page. You can order the book from Warwick's anyplace, anytime. So with that, I'm going to sign off of Facebook. So good night. Good night in England. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you, Anne. And congratulations on your novel.
Yeah, absolutely. This is fantastic.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Okay.
Okay.